Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentary on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by J. Donald Walters. This week's reading is, How High Should We Aspire? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The passage this week is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. The easiest explanation for these words is that they were spoken in criticism of the scribes and Pharisees, particularly since Jesus was often verbally attacked by them and stood up to them fearlessly. However, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge to the disciples who aspired to spiritual perfection to tell them, don't be like those who lack any such aspiration. Jesus, in fact, says only a few verses later, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. What Jesus was referring to here then was self-righteousness of the priests. Don't seek perfection, he was saying to his disciples, in the image you project towards others. Don't be satisfied with goodness born merely of ego definitions. The highest virtue is to transcend the very thought of personal virtue in the realization of God alone is the doer. Before this realization, even the thought, I am kind, or I am truthful, is self-limiting. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 7th chapter, yet hard the wise Mahatma is to find, that man who saith, all is Vasudeva. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Oh, 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 oh.
Well, good morning, everyone. I don't know if you noticed, but we just had our summer last week. Not really, but it felt that way. It was warm enough to be summer, and now here we are again. We love the rain. It really makes us all green, and that's why we're here. It's joyful. So I just wanted to point out, as you probably all noticed, or if you're new, that we have a Swami Kriyananda right there in the middle of our altar, which is a special blessing for us because he usually doesn't reside there. Anyway, we had, for those of you who came, we had a very special, we call Moksha commemoration for Swamiji on Thursday. It was exactly 3 years from his passing, or we call it his liberation, because he was a great soul, and he achieved that freedom in God in this lifetime. And so it's a celebration. We usually think when babies are born, oh, we humans, we go, oh, how wonderful. And guess what the babies are doing? They're crying their heads off, right? And then, when that time comes, when we leave, all of us are crying and it's so sad. And yet, that person, as they silently drift into that deepest self, they're in joy. And they're just really happy to be into that other space, which is that ever-new joy that we seek here on this planet. So it's so interesting. So we believe in celebrating that passing because it is a very great moment, a great time. And Swami just really, he epitomizes what this topic is all about. Because Swami Kriyananda, for those who don't know, he is the founder of Ananda, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. And he brought, that's why we're here, he brought this teaching out into the world. It wasn't just a monastery. It was for householders. It was for the world. It was for every single one of us who was seeking that reality that most of us, when we started, had no idea what we were seeking. And Swami, he wrote 150 books. He wrote 400 pieces of music. He had all these colonies, you could call them, all over the West Coast. He founded one in Italy, a big center in Italy, and India is growing. I mean, all these things. And you know, the only thing he said that he wanted was to be the very best disciple that he could be. That's all he wanted to be remembered as Master's very good disciple. That's it. And, you know, that's not ego, is it? You know, he could have easily gotten into this, I mean, not he could have, but anyone else, you know, we write one song and it's on the hit parade. Guess what? The ego gets all puffed up and we get famous and, you know, the ego takes off. Or, you know, you happen to make a lot of money all of a sudden and, you know, suddenly you've got power. You know, you have anything you want, or you think that's anything you want. And, you know, this topic is all about that particular aspect. How high should we aspire? And, you know, once we start understanding, we want to aspire a lot higher than what it is before we start to understand what is the true reality. Because I know years ago I read a book called No Shortcut to the Top by Ed Viseurs, who is a very famous high-altitude climber. And of course, in my 20s and 30s, and even through my 40s, I was climbing every mountain I could. I loved getting up high. And so that was a very exciting book to read for me. And, you know, he climbed with no oxygen the 14 highest mountains in the world, all over 24,000 feet. But it took him 18 years to do it. And, you know, you look back and he said, yes, he knew it was an accomplishment, but he said the greatest accomplishment was the fact that he got back down again. You know, don't we really do some strange things to ourselves, you know, in satisfying that ego? And, you know, the ego is really, the purpose of that ego is just to simply help us to find out what we don't want. You know, we get it and then we don't want it. Because once we get it, we have to get something else. Because what we just got isn't enough. What we just got suddenly just isn't satisfying anymore. So how high should we aspire? Well, you know, you can aspire to climb the highest mountains, or you can aspire to be the president, or you can aspire to be the richest person in the world, etc., and all those gradations underneath that. And yet, you know, none of those people have found it. You ask them. You can see from their lives. The movie stars are probably one of the biggest examples. They've got money, they've got fame. For that, they have some power. Are they happy? No. Look at what happens to their lives. Very few. Some of them, yes, but not very few. And because what we're seeking is not out in this material world. It's what Swami Kriyananda found. It's that happiness within. It's that joy within. It's that little voice that, you know, it never, ever is going to go away. I used to think, when I grow up, you know, I will have found it. And I remember, because all through my growing years, I just couldn't find it. And, well, guess what? I haven't grown up yet, because I know I'm still looking for it. And yet, the joy is starting to happen. The understanding has happened in terms of what I need to do. And it's all that's left is just to do it. That's all that's left. And Yogananda told us, he said, you know, when you are ready to seek the spiritual path, when you know that that's what you want, when you know that there is nothing in this material world that's going to satisfy that, that is when you're almost home. You're almost there. Because what we truly are those sparks of God. We're within us, when each one of us is that spark of God, that unconditional love, that ever new joy. And someone like Swami Kriyananda spent his lifetime serving God without ego, doing his very best. And what happened was that his light, that light that shines within all of us, became more and more transparent. Because as he removed those sheaths of ego, those dark veils that we keep in front of us, that keep us bound to thinking we're this little body. And Swami Kriyananda gave us that wonderful definition of ego. We are a bundle of self-definitions. And that little bundle of self-definitions holds us inside this little body. And it makes us think that we're limited to this body. And yet, we've had millions of bodies. This is just this simply one that we have in this lifetime, you know? And if we haven't found God, then we'll get another one in another lifetime. It'll come again. We keep, you know, it's just funny. I was talking to someone, this was quite a few years ago, but when I was getting on this path, just explain, I was so excited to think that, you know, I wouldn't have to come back. You know, I could be in that joy forever. And yet I said, you know, but if I don't make it, then I get to come back. And the person said, oh, goody, you mean I get to come back? You know, they thought that was a real plus to feel that they would reincarnate and get to come back again and again. So, and that's fine. You know, that's where they're at. But we kind of get to a point where it's just kind of this monotonous sense of being here. We can go through the motions, and, you know, we try not to be dull and boring and, you know, whatever, but, you know, our heart isn't in it. You know, our heart's struggling for something else. And that's what we're aspiring to. How high should we aspire? We need to aspire to be what we truly are, which is that spark of God. It's there. It's right within us, like it was with Swami Kriyananda and all the great saints that are on our altar, and so many others that are known and unknown. It's when we remove those bundles of self-definitions, like dark curtains in front of the light. It's what they're like. Like a mummy, you know, we're wrapped in all these dark curtains of self-definitions. But the light is in there, and we know it's in there, and we're trying like crazy to come out of it. And we can, as we begin this journey, this spiritual path that we're on. It's happening right now as you seek. And you're seeking. You're beginning to shed those veils. And we saw it with Swami Kriyananda. Towards the end, he had very little shielding him, or shielding the light within him, so that we could perceive. It's not like it's a visible light, like a flashlight type light. It's just a sense of that purity. The heart was pure. It was that love that was emanating from him, that joy that came. And that's what is within us all the time. And we kind of perceive it now and then, but we need to do it more so. Just get in tune with it continually on this path as we walk, so that we too can begin to shine that out to everybody. I was thinking, I lived up on Camino Island for a year and a half, and I used to love in the evening to go out to the Camino Island State Park. I mean, it's a beautiful place up there, but I used to like to go up and I'd walk. There's a trail that goes along a high bank, and there were all sorts of little peekaboo and larger views of the water and the Olympics. And I'd like to go up there as the sun was setting, because it's just such a good analogy of what it is what it's all about. Because I could see the clouds, and as the sun started to set, the clouds would turn from the white fluffy things that we know, and they'd turn in this crimson gold color. And then they'd begin to get a little orangey as the sun went down, and then they'd get pinky, and then the lavenders would come out and the purples. And then eventually, when the sun disappeared, behind the mountains, they turn a dull gray, you know? And that's like us. You know, the more the veils that we got around us, the more dull gray we are. We're all kind of we got these colors, you know, we try to make ourselves bright, but, you know, really what's in us is hidden behind many, many layers. And it's that wonderful color, that wonderful light that we see in the clouds. And so what are we supposed to do? I know Rajarsi Janakananda was most of us know here, he was Yogananda's foremost man disciple. And he was at the same time a very wealthy, pretty famous, well-known businessman. And so people go, well, you know, can I do both? Because for some people, the spiritual path doesn't appeal because they think they have to walk around with a begging bowl and be in poverty and, you know, that kind of stuff, which doesn't appeal. Well, that can be the case for some, but most of us know. No, we're in a different world right now. And so Rajarsi shows us that we can live a life that, you know, seems pretty normal. And he aspired, and he achieved fame, he achieved wealth. And yet, even in his own words, he said he was so unhappy. He said he was just restless and nervous and anxious, and he couldn't sit still, he couldn't sleep, until he met Yogananda, and he found the clue to what was going on. And as he meditated, he began to feel that peace and joy within him. And within a very short time, he was a great soul, obviously, to start with, but applying the teachings 100%, in a very short time, he was very deep. He was becoming a shining soul, too. And as Yogananda said, he, too, achieved freedom in this world. So the examples are there for us, you know. And I want to give you some advice because this is always some of the things I need to listen to, I know, because so how do we do this? You know, how do we undertake this? We know we've got some tools and techniques to use, but how can we move ourselves forward so that we too can shine our light ever more brightly? And one of them is, as we've been talking about, release our self-definitions. And I want to kind of compare this to like a hose. We all know what a hose is like, and water runs through it. And some of these hoses, which I just learned about, have a valve, and you can turn the valve, you know, to stop the flow of the hose, or you can turn it upward and it goes full force. So you can turn it either way to decrease or turn off that flow. So anyway, what we need is to have that full flow of God within us. Just allow that energy of the divine to just flow up from the base of our spine, up through and out into the world, and just allow that to be our guide. But most of us tend to use the little valve that I'm talking about. We tend to turn the hose, you know, stop the water a little bit by turning it one way, or stop it by turning it the other way. And what I'm talking about is we do things like, we're not as much like the Pharisees in the reading, the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus said they were self-righteous. Their self-righteousness, you know, they didn't want to be like that. Well, we can be. We can have some of that. Our pride, you know, we do something and we know we feel pretty good about it. We think we're the doer, and, you know, we might not have a lot of ego in it, but we've got some. You know, we do some nice artwork. It's kind of like we try to think that it's God through us, but we still have some pride in that. Or we have a position that we're perhaps in charge of, and we take some feeling like we're in charge, and, you know, we're doing it. And it goes on and on, you know. We're working at it. But there's a little of that. So the hose is the flow is turned back a little bit when we get into that aspect of who we are. And yet the other aspect too, you know, when the hose turns the other way, and I think that's more what most of us here are into, is self-criticism. that we're too hard on ourselves, that we judge ourselves against these great people. And we say, I can't do that. Look at me. I can't even write one song. How can I write 400? I can't get up and talk very well. Who am I? We look at ourselves and we don't give ourselves credit. And I'm talking about the credit is that we can be as great a channel for God, and we can be whatever it is that God wants us to be if we just allow ourselves to open up that valve and just let that hose, that energy pour out. And yet we limit it because is not criticizing you or judging you either, because we all have it. We have our upbringing. We have the thoughts that we've been raised with about who we are and what we can do. And I remember for me it was, little girls are meant to be seen and not heard. And I heard that so much. And my sister and I, we just have to do everything we could so we could have to be quiet all the time, except when we got away from the adults. And it goes on and on, We all have those things. And yet that's not who we are. Yes, those things that come to us as lessons, and that's the thing to do, is realize they're just lessons through which we can grow, through which we can get our strength. It's little step by little step by little step until we too have that valve wide open. So take this to heart. When you find yourself criticizing yourself and saying all those tapes about who you are and who you really aren't, put out the energy to just switch your mind into something else that's going to take you away from those old tapes that are bringing you down and not allowing you to open up and allow that flow of God to come pouring through. Another one is contentment or non-attachment, and this one is similar in that in the face of all challenges, to the degree that we can be non-attached to it, it's what's going to help us grow the most. There's a story that in the Crystal Clarity magazine that I was reading online, and this was something that Asha Praver, who was one of the light bearers in the Palo Alto and a wonderful speaker. Anyway, she told the story about when she was in her younger days, but she went to Swami Kriyananda. She was going through a very big test, or many big tests, and she went to him and she was just pouring out her heart, about how wonderful the spiritual path was and all her gurubhais, and, she loved the teachings, but she had this big test and this big test and this big test, and they were just so hard, and she just did not see how she could do it, and she was just feeling so overwhelmed. And Swami Kriyananda, what she says, he just looked at her, didn't say a word, and she kept talking, and he didn't say a word, and she finished talking, and he didn't say a word, and he still didn't say anything, and she said suddenly she got it. It was like she could just see all her whining, kind of in front of her, across in the silence that was going on there. And she realized that what she was really saying was, the spiritual path is wonderful if only it were different. If only it wasn't like this for me. How many of you, I have said that, if only I don't have to do that. Isn't it really wonderful? But, ugh, And I wouldn't mind that one, the test that she's going through, but mine, no way, that's too hard. And isn't it funny, because everything that comes to us is exactly what we need to hear. It's exactly the test that we need to go through. And so, of course, it's exactly what we don't want. So that's the fun of the spiritual path. But that is one of the big things that we have to do, is to be content. And one of the things that I found so helpful is to just, when you see it coming and when you're going through it, just go, okay, this is you, God, and if I mess up, oh well, is there anything worse than that? No, I guess not. That's not so bad after all. Just give it to God. This is what I have to do. This is a big one. But, it's yours. And whatever the results are, they're yours. That's what you want. Because this whole fun thing that we're going through here in life, the ups and the downs, is just part of the divine play for us to grow so that we can come home to him. Because he loves us more than we can even imagine. And he's trying to help us to know that love and to love him in the same way. As a miser loves money, as a drowning man wants air, that's how we have to love God. Even Master in Yogananda, in his teachings in the Autobiography of a Yogi, he writes how he prayed for God's guidance. He prayed all night, and he cried, and he begged, and until he felt like his head was going to pop off. That's pretty intense. And we will get there, but we have to keep taking the steps. It's kind of like driving on a road in New England, if you're from New Hampshire or Vermont or those areas, or you go up in the mountains here. You get on those roads and they twist and they wind and they up and they down. And, we're on this spiritual path, and then there's sometimes these big rocks in the middle. I remember when I was living at Ananda Village, driving this road into town from the village. It's this windy, twisty road down and across the river and then up the other side. And it had been after a big rain, driving this road, and suddenly rounding this curve, there was this boulder the size of a car. And it wasn't right in my lane. It was just barely off to the side. It had been obvious that someone had, with a bulldozer, had pushed it as far off to the side as it could. But it was still quite prominent, and, luckily no one was coming the other way. But, if that obstacle hadn't have been pushed aside, I probably would have smashed into it. But anyway, those obstacles happen, don't they? And so we just go over them, we go through them, and finally the road ends at that rainbow, that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. More so, not really, but it ends in that joy in God. I was going to spend a little time on this book, Land of Golden Sunshine, because this is an allegory, and Swami says this book of any, and most of us don't even know it exists. It's one of this little tiny thing, and he wrote it when he was very young. But he said it really is probably the most, it expresses the best who he is. And it really is an allegory about the soul yearning. And I just highly recommend it, a soul's yearning, about a young woman, a young girl. It's a story, but a young girl living in a very dreary mill town, having this humdrum job of sewing buttons on men's shirts. And everything was dreary and nobody was happy. And, she'd come home. She worked 6 days a week and she had one day off. And she'd come home and she'd sit in her room, which had only an attic window that came through the roof. And, she would watch the sky and she would just think there has to be something more, just yearning for something. She didn't know what it was. And one day the sunlight, she was watching the sunlight come through her window and go across the floor, and this man just kind of morphed into this light being right there in front of her. And she felt such divine love from that man, and she was just awed. And she got down on her knees, and she could feel the light and that being coming towards her, and she became afraid. And so when she opened her eyes again, the being was gone. But she felt for the first time in her life love, true love and joy. And so she went back to work. And again, all week she prayed, I hope, she termed this man the Sun Man. I hope the Sun Man returns. And so the next Sunday, again, she was watching as the sun was coming across her floor. And sure enough, the Sun Man returned. He emerged into that beam of light. And this time she was wanting what it was that he was giving her. It wasn't a surprise. And yet as he came closer and she looked into his eyes, she didn't feel fear, but she felt her smallness of who she was. She felt ashamed, and she felt not worthy. And so she closed her eyes, and again, the sun man disappeared. And so again, she waited and waited for the sun, and the clouds were there. And finally, another Sunday came where the sun was out, and the beam came across the floor. And the sun man again emerged to her, and he said, "Will you come home with me? I have tried for so many, and they have all turned away. Will you turn away?" And she was feeling this time such joy, and she was committed that she would not turn away. And she said, "No, I will go with you. I will go with you. I want what you have." And he then emerged with her and took her away in that light. And so it's just a nice little allegory of where we're headed and what we need to do. So it's something to read as a bedtime story to yourself. It's very encouraging. I just wanted to end with a Yogananda saying, and he said he's from India, and yet he liked many things about America. And one of the things he liked about America was he said he liked the American attitude. He said eventually, why not now? He said, that is the spirit I like about America. So here we are, eventually, why not now? So let's resolve to the best that you can to live from this moment on for God. And just how do we do that? Well, everything we do, share with God. Everything we think, all the fruits of our labors, all that. Just try to bring him more and more into our life. Yes, you'll forget. Yes, you'll have to keep bringing it back. But, if you keep doing it, it will eventually start to become a part of your life and who you are. And you'll feel so much more joy, so much happier with everything that happens to you. So do begin now. Eventually, why not now? So let's take a minute.
Reading from Whispers from Eternity. I attuned my life with thine. Now my life has become a long, unbroken inspiration. Thy fountain of bliss refreshes and delights me night and day, whether I be wakeful, fast asleep, or dreaming fondly of thee. Oh, what has become of me? Delight on overwhelming delight. Endless, indescribable thrills of divine delight spray unceasingly over me. O aged nectar, wine of centuries, I found thee at last, and will taste of thy sweetness forever, forever, forever.